Hello and welcome to episode number 9 in the Let's Build Shadowgate series. In the last episode we kind of finished up the base game. We had the user able to open the front door, enter the hallway, open the door in the hallway, and then get to the coffin room where they could click on the Banshee to win the game. But we want to add some more features to make this a little bit more game-like. So what we're going to be doing today is adding a sword item to the hallway that the user can pick up. If the user chooses to click on the sword, it will be added to their inventory, and then the game will intelligently know whether or not the user has picked up the sword. Later we'll use this so that when the Banshee is clicked on, if the user has the sword, they win. Otherwise, they lose. So there should be a sword icon in the graphics pack. You can use that, or you can use the sword object from the objects gallery that comes with Alice. However you do it is perfectly fine, but let's head over to Alice, add the sword, and kind of create a basic inventory for use in our game. So here we are back in Alice, and as I've done in the prior videos, the first thing I'm going to do is head over to the Properties tab, and I'm going to right click on all my variables so I can watch them as the game runs. Once I have that done, I'm going to hit play so you can get a reminder of where we're at. We have our start screen. When I press space, which is the equivalent of my start button, I'll hit start. I'm here on the main castle screen. I'm able to open the door by clicking on it, which affects the door 1 closed variable. Now that door 1 closed is set to false, I can click on the door again to enter the hallway. Door 2 right now is closed, but when I click on it, we can watch that variable change to false. And that allows me to click on the door again to enter the Banshee room. Now right now Banshee clicked is set to false, and if I click on the Banshee, that changes to true, and the You Win screen is displayed. So if your program doesn't do this right here, you can follow along in episodes 1 through 8 to get your program here. Now that we know where our program stands and we have our variables good to go, we can start programming the hallway to have a sword. There's a couple things that we're going to need to do to prep for that. The first thing that I'm going to want to do is I want to take a look at my mouse tracking method here. This is the method that runs in the events while the world is running. So this is running, approximately 30, 40 times per second, or as fast as your computer will operate it. So I want to take a look at that. And I'm also going to need to take a look at the screen 2 handler. The screen 2 handler is where we're going to have the sword. Now, because the sword is on screen number 2, we'll have to bring that up into our programming window. So this screen 3 Banshee fight right here, I'm going to set the isShowing property to false, turning off all my screens. And since screen 2 has an open and closed door version, they're in large part the same, so it doesn't matter which one I turn on. So I'm going to take screen 2 door closed and set its isShowing property to true so that I can start to work in this environment here and add the sword to my game. Now that I'm here on the screen, I'm going to add my sword. Now you can use the sword that's here in the Add Objects. I'm going to actually turn mine into kind of a 2D billboard, so I'm going to use File, Make Billboard, and I'm going to go to that graphics pack that you can download in the comments below. And here I've got a graphic called itemsword.png. And when I import it, it will show up here on the screen. And I'm going to click on Add Objects to move it and position it where I want it in the world. Now, it can disappear kind of into the back here if it goes behind the billboard, so I'm going to make sure that it's in front of the billboard, and it really doesn't matter how far in front. Because this is a 2D game, we're not really using the Z-axis here. So I'm going to put the sword maybe right about here so the user can see it. We're going to move it up in the world, and this is probably a little bit abnormally large, so I'm going to reduce the size a little bit. Now I might want to play with the color a little bit because this kind of disappears into the screen, but for right now, that is a pretty workable sword. So I'm going to click Done, and I've got the sword added to my world. Now that it's added to my world, you'll notice that this is going to kind of create a little bit of a bug in our program. If I hit play now, you'll see the sword is still sitting right there on the screen. When I hit space to start the game, the sword is on my first screen. I open the door, sword is still there. I go to the hallway, that's where it should be, but no matter what screen I'm on, that sword is always showing. I'm going to want to come up with some code that will make the sword only appear if it's showing screen number 2, or if we're showing the hallway screen, and then I want it to disappear or at least move to the inventory screen after it's been clicked on. In order to do this, I need to keep track of first whether or not the sword has been clicked on or not. I'm going to create a new variable, and it's going to be a Boolean variable called sword taken. And sword taken will start with a value of false, letting me know that the sword at the beginning of the game has not been clicked on yet. So let's go ahead and watch that variable as well. The next step is to create an event and an event handler that will handle picking up the sword. Now I'm just going to use the standard when the mouse is clicked on something event in Alice to handle the event. So create a new event, and we'll use when the mouse is clicked on something. It's the same thing we use for our mouse click handler, but in this case, I want when the mouse is clicked on the sword item. Now I don't have an event handler for this right now, so I'm going to go to Methods, and I want this to be in my sword item. So select your sword item, and I'm going to click Create New Method, and create this method called pickup. Pickup as a method is going to run when the user clicks on the sword to pick it up. So now that I have this method programmed, when the item sword is clicked on, we want to run item sword pickup. Now naturally, the first thing that we're going to want to do when the user picks up the sword is adjust this variable that we just created, sword taken, and we want this to adjust to true. So I'm going to take sword taken, drag it over here to my sword pickup, and have the value of that variable set to true over a duration of 0 seconds. Now when the user clicks on the sword and it runs this pickup method, it should at least change this variable to true. It's not going to have any impact on the program right now, but we'll get to that in a second. So let's test our program. I'm going to hit play and go to the appropriate screen and just watch this variable. Right now, sword taken has a value of false, and when the sword is clicked on, that changes to a value of true. This lets me know that my program, at least right now, intelligently knows whether or not the sword has been clicked on. We still have the problem that that sword appears on every screen, so that's the next thing that we're going to have to deal with. To deal with this problem of the sword appearing on all screens, we're actually going to have to head over to the mouse tracking method here. And the reason we're going to use the mouse tracking method is the mouse tracking method is what's constantly updating. Whenever our world is running, this mouse tracking method is running in the background. So we're going to use that fact to have it constantly check to see if the screen is equal to 2. We know that the sword will only appear in this hallway. We also know that this hallway is game screen number 2. Therefore, the isShowing property of the sword should only be set to true if the game screen is equal to 2. We're going to add an if statement here to our mouse tracking method to make that check. So let's click on our sword item, and let's set the isShowing property to false right now, meaning that the sword is completely invisible. I'm going to add an if check and say if, and use true as a placeholder. Go to my world variables and say if the game screen equals 2, meaning we're on this hallway, then I want the item sword isShowing property set to true over a duration of 0 seconds. If that's not true, then I want the isShowing property set to false over a duration of 0 seconds. So if you can think about how this is working, as the game is running, 30 times per second, it's going to check to see if the game screen is equal to number 2. Whenever the game screen is equal to number 2, the sword will be showing, and whenever the game screen isn't equal to number 2, the sword will be invisible. When I hit play, see there is no sword here because the game screen is equal to 0, so that if statement isn't executing. When I press start and go to game screen number 1, I still have no sword. When I click and enter this room, game screen equals 2, that if check is now finding itself to be true, setting the isShowing property of the sword to true, and now we can see the sword. And I can click on the sword and still adjust this variable. You'll notice if I click on the door, sword is still visible, and it's still visible because game screen is still equal to 2. But when I enter the next room, the sword disappears because this game screen is now equal to 3. Now the problem we've got with this is when we enter the world and say the user clicks on the sword, sword taken is set to a value of true, but when sword taken is set to a value of true, the sword is still there, meaning the user can click on it as many times as they want. If the user clicks on the sword, we want it to disappear. We can do that by making some adjustments to this if check. Really, two things have to be true for the sword to be showing. We know we need to be on game screen number 2, but I'm going to use this arrow, select logic, and use AND, putting true as a placeholder. The sword will only show up if the game screen equals 2, and then we'll go ahead and go to our variables list, which is here under world, and sword taken is false. The way we're going to do a false check is put world sword taken, go to logic, and select not. What this if check is now checking for is the game screen has to equal 2 and the sword can't be taken yet. Once we click on the sword and sword taken becomes true, this is no longer a true if statement and we'll be executing the else clause. So we can test this to see if it works by entering our world, noting that there's no sword here, entering the screen, and now when we click on the sword, it should disappear. So we click on the sword now disappears because our sword taken variable is set to true. And whenever the sword taken variable is set to true, you'll notice that this if clause will no longer execute, setting the isShowing property to our sword to true. Now we're going to want to add some animation to the sword. We're going to want to make it a little bit cooler than that right there. But from a functional standpoint, our game now gives you the ability to click on the sword. Before we end this video, let's go ahead and apply this to the Banshee. Now that we know our program can determine whether or not we picked up a sword and display it correctly, let's go back to the Banshee screen. So I'm going to take the isShowing property of this screen and set it to false, and turn the Banshee back on by setting the isShowing property to true. And I know right now I can click on the Banshee, and whenever I click on the Banshee, I get a you win message. If I take a look at the world methods I've created, I'm going to go into the game 3 or the screen 3 handler. This is where the Banshee click is registered. And right now, all the user has to do is click on the Banshee, and the you win screen will show up. Since we're now going to have a losing condition, let's turn off the Banshee fight screen for a second by turning the isShowing property to false. And let's add our final billboard of this game. I'm going to make a billboard, and in the graphics pack, we have a graphic, you lose. So this is the screen that will display when the user loses. So we'll go into Add Objects, have it turn to face the camera, and we'll enlarge it a little bit so that it's kind of front and center. Now we have this you lose message, and with the you lose message, I know it's up, so let's set the isShowing property to false, and let's set the Banshee fight screen back to an isShowing property of true. Now just to be consistent, I am going to go to my first method and turn off the you lose graphic. I'm going to click on the you lose graphic. I'm going to set the isShowing property of that to false over a duration of 0 seconds so that that's not showing when the user presses play. And I don't have it open, and I can't see a situation where I would have that open, but just to make sure if I'm working on the you lose screen, I want to make sure that when the user hits play, it doesn't have in error a you lose screen displaying, and this will make sure that it's always turned off when the user hits play. Now let's go back to our screen 3 handler. Adding the win condition now should be pretty simple. This if statement right here will check to see if the Banshee has been clicked on. Right now, if the Banshee's been clicked on, we run this this is the code right here that turns the screen off, turns on the you win screen. We're going to add an if statement underneath the check here to see if the Banshee's been clicked on. So when this right here is executed, we know the Banshee's been clicked on. We'll say if true, and what we want to check is, has the sword been picked up? So we'll go to our world variables and say, if the sword has been taken, then we can display the you win screen. If the sword hasn't been taken, then this else clause will execute. I'm going to make a quick copy of this do together statement, and I'm going to drag it to this else clause right here. This is what will execute if the Banshee is clicked on, but the user hasn't picked up the sword. It's very similar to the you win screen. I still want Banshee click to be set to true because the Banshee was clicked. I still want to turn off this Banshee fight scene, only instead of adding the you win graphic and setting its value to true, I'm going to delete this, go to the you lose graphic, and set its is showing property to true. If you click on the Banshee without the sword, you're going to lose the game. With that added, let's hit play and give it a test. We enter the room, we pick up the sword and notice that sword taken is set to true, enter the room with the Banshee and click, and we get the proper you win message. If we restart, fail to pick up the sword, and head into the Banshee room and click on the Banshee, we're now getting a you lose message. By using a simple if check to see if the sword has been taken, we now have both a winning condition and a losing condition for our game. Having added both the win and lose condition, and now adding a sword to the hallway to give us more of a game-like feel, that's going to end episode 9 right there. We're not quite done with Shadowgate, though we're getting very close. One of the last things that I want to do is add some animation to the sword so that when you click on it, it doesn't simply disappear. I want to have it kind of stylistically add to the good screen here so that you know you've got a sword in your inventory to make it feel more like a completed game. But we'll be doing that in episode number 10. Now, as always, if you have any questions about anything you've seen here, something's not working for you, or there's any question that I can help answer, just leave them there in the comments, and I will certainly help you out any way that I can. Thank you so much for your support of the Alice tutorial series and the Let's Build Shadowgate series. Have a great day, and we'll see you next time.